Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second of 3 sessions of the Financial Management Training Series for Distressed Cities and Persistent Poverty Technical Assistant Program. My name is Andre Brickhouse, and I will be your facilitator this afternoon. Our topic today will be the standards of accounting policies and procedures. Next slide, please. Now, here's a little background about the DCTA program and how we got to this point. During the preparation of the needs assessment for many distressed cities, our team identified opportunities for organizations to strengthen its financial management infrastructure by implementing and disseminating accounting policies and procedures that represent senior leadership values. Accounting policies and procedures provide an organization a consistent, documented approach to mitigate material errors and omissions on the entity's financial statements or its federal financial report. Next slide, please. What we would like you to get from this presentation today is an understanding of the impacts adequate accounting policies and procedures have on an organization accounting, compliance, and financial environment. Next slide, please. Our table of contents, what we want to talk about today, we want to start off with internal controls and how the framework is used to structure your organizational policies and procedures. Next, we want to move into the standards of policies and procedures and how effective policies and procedures impact an organizational reporting, compliance, and strategic environment. We will also evaluate the structure outline of a policy and procedure document. And then finally, we'll end up with a schedule of monitoring. And here we will talk about what an organization should do to ensure their internal practices are documented in their accounting policies and procedures. Next slide, please. Now, internal control framework. Now, that starts off with adequate policies and procedures and it all begins with your internal control environment. The framework of internal control is the very backbone of the organization policies and procedures. Now let's identify the attributes of an internal control framework. It starts off with your control environment, then your control activities, risk assessment, information and communication, and monitoring. Now, what does all that mean? Next slide, please. Notice the pinwheel on this slide. This slide basically takes your internal control basic, your internal control framework, and show you the methodology or the process of how you should think about internal controls. And it starts off with your control environment or your tone at the top. And then it goes into your risk assessment process, and then your control activities that you put in place to mitigate the risk, and then the information that you identify, and then how you communicate that information. And finally, the monitoring process to identify any deficits that you have found during the monitoring process that's going to affect your internal control program. And then what are you doing to resolve those deficits? And then it starts back all over again with the control environment. And it's a perpetual circle to ensure that there is no material errors that is going to end up on your financial statements or your federal financial reports. And it starts off again with your control environment. Now, the control environment is the very foundation where the organization values, integrity, commitment to excellence reside. The attributes of the control environment is normally referred to as the tone at the top. The tone is the very essence of senior leadership expectation for the organization. And the policies and procedures are the blueprint for carrying out senior leadership's requirements. The next attribute is risk assessment. In this internal control framework, the organization is required to identify all reasonably expected risks to the organization and make a determination of how management will respond to those risks. There are three ways to manage risk in the risk assessment. The first way is to mitigate risk. And this is identifying ways to reduce the severity of the outcome. So a policy that you can have in your organization would be basically any check that is written in excess of $2,000 or whatever the value is you want it to be, must have 2 authorized signatories. That ensures that for one person to make a fraudulent check, they're mitigating the risk to be maxed out at $2,000. So that's how they mitigate the risk to ensure fraudulent checks will not exceed $2,000 for one person. The next way to manage risk is to transfer risk. And that way you can purchase insurance. And a policy that you can have in your organization is that all vehicles owned by the organization must have sufficient insurance. That way, if there's any damage, the vehicle is stolen, or something has happened to the vehicle, that transfer the risk from replacing the vehicle from the organization to the insurance company. So therefore, that risk has been transferred. And then finally, you can accept the risk. And basically, accepting the risk means that the risk is small in value or infrequent by its very nature to the organization, or it could be small in value and frequent by its very nature to the organization, or it could be large in value and infrequent by its very nature to the organization. And it depends on your risk tolerance on what level of risk you're willing to accept. If your risk tolerance is low, you're not going to be able to take something that's large in value and frequent to your organization. That's when you'll have to either mitigate that risk or transfer that risk. So you have to make sure you look at your risk tolerance documentation, understand what level of risk tolerance you're willing to take as an organization, and then that will explain exactly what level of risk you're willing to set in your organization. The next attribute we would like to bring your attention is the control activities. And in your policies and procedures, your control activities identify the activity being performed by personnel within your organization necessary to respond to the risk identified. These are the procedures or steps identified in the policies and procedures that should be performed to A, mitigate the risk, B, transfer the risk, or accept the risk. Information and communication. In this attribute of the internal control framework, your policies and procedures identify the degree of the information captured in your financial management system. And some of the information we based off of how your chart of accounts is set up, what type of reporting criteria you have in place, and the degree of the information in your budget, to just name a few. And that level of information will be defined based off of your communication criteria. And then for communication, you will make sure that this information that you defined in your reports, your chart of account, and your budget is being communicated to the right senior leadership person. That person should review and analyze the data and be able to make decisions based off of that information that you provided to them that are strategic and operational in nature. And then finally, monitoring. In this attribute of the internal control framework, your policies and procedures identify personnel that evaluate and review the assessed risk, the control activities, and the information and communication framework to ensure that the initial assessments are still valid, to determine if additional steps are needed to accommodate newly identified risks, and to ensure that the implemented control activities are working as designed. Next slide, please. Internal controls. Now, what does internal control impact? Now, for operations, internal control ensures effective and efficient use of all resources to meet the operational objectives for both recipient and subrecipients. For financial reporting, internal controls ensures reliable financial data is included in the organizational financial audits and federal financial reports. And then finally, for compliance, internal control ensures all applicable laws, regulation, and compliance requirements are met. Simply put, internal controls are those activities performed to ensure that what an organization wants to happen will, and the things wanting to prevent will not. Next slide, please. What is the impact of effective internal controls on an organizational accounting policies and procedures? Internal controls are critical to achieving operational, strategic, compliance, and reporting objectives. Why? Because internal controls hones in on organizational values, and the organizational accounting policies and procedures are a roadmap for delivering a consistent approach of senior leadership expectation to the entire organizational staff. Next slide, please. Okay, here's your typical outline for policies and procedures. What we want to do here is basically put together a template that an organization, such as an entity that is working with the DCTA program, can utilize to implement in their organization a standard policy and procedure template. Now, this template is not going to be complete, and it's not going to necessarily fit your entire organization, but it is a template to get started to ensure that you have those standard policies and procedures in your organization and to accommodate your organization. And then you can build upon these items, or you can remove some of these items. You can make this policy and procedure template as expansive as you want it or as narrow as you want it. So let's start off with the first section, which is the general policies. And it starts off here with the organizational structure. Here you want to talk about the governance of the organization. You want to talk about, is it a council or is it a board? If it's a council or board, you want to talk about, is it basically elected board? Are they elected or are they appointed? You want to talk about the roles and the structure of each board or council member. Then you want to communicate the department heads, their roles, and then any key staff that is utilized in those departments. And then next, you want to talk about those departments. Here, I'm only bringing up one department, which is the finance department. But if you want to talk about all the departments in the organization, you can here. And you want to discuss the structure of the department. You want to go from the CFO, which is the head of the finance department, all the way down to the clerks. Talk about their responsibility and the standards, and then talk about any standards for financial management system. Here, 2 CFR Part 200 is clear on standards as relate to financial management system. If you're following the uniform administrative guidance, you may want to put that criteria here. Again, 200.302 financial management system, uniform guidance. That helps reviewers understand that you are following the uniform guidance. It makes it easier for them to understand what type of expectation that they should be looking at as it relates to looking at your policy and procedures, and finally looking at your financial management environment. And then also here, you can put in your business conduct. You can talk about the ethical behavior, what senior leadership expect out of their senior leaders when they're contracting business for the organization, what that behavior should look like, any compliance and laws and regulations that you need to adhere to. And of course, any written or unwritten organizational policies should be documented here to ensure that everyone is on the same page as it relates to business conduct and specific organizational policies for those business conduct. And then next, you want to talk a little bit about your security here. You want to talk about security related to the finance department. How do you secure those financial assets? You want to talk about electronic data, how that's secured, password protected, how often you got to change your password, things of that nature. You want to talk about security for general office space, lock and key, bio security, things of that nature. And then also you want to talk about consumer information, how you disseminate consumer information and how you separate consumer information from proprietary information, and how do you ensure that the two are not ever commingled to prevent your proprietary information from being presented out to the masses in error. Also, then you want to go to your general ledger and your chart of accounts. You may want to talk a little bit about that as well here. You want to talk about an overview of your general ledger. You want to talk about your distribution criteria, who gets the details of the general ledger, how often they get it, estimates or accruals. You want to talk about how you prepare those here. Journal entries, when they're prepared, how often they're prepared, who prepares them, who reviews them. Reconciliations, how often do you perform reconciliations in your organization? And then finally, spreadsheet management. If you're preparing spreadsheets that are integral to supporting supporting summary information in your financial management system, you want to show how those spreadsheets should be maintained in your organization and how to pull those up to accompany any type of financial management system reports that is being ran. You want to talk about that in this section. Next slide, please. And then here we want to basically walk through the next 6 sections of the typical outline. These are the major headings of what should be in a accounting policies and procedures. And we start off here with your policies associated with revenues and cash receipts. This is pretty much the standard layout, the standard format. You don't necessarily have to have it this way, as I said earlier, but this is standard, and you can use this format to help you build on your own accounting policies and procedures. So with the section 2, policy associated with revenues and cash receipt, we want to talk about revenue recognition policies like the receipt of taxes. If your organization received tax revenue, you want to talk about that tax revenue, how it's received, what type of tax revenue it is, and how do you account for, and how do you record it. Same thing with if you get reimbursed for or paid for charges for services. You want to talk about those services that you perform in the organization and how you record that revenue that you receive from the services that's being charged. If you get grant income, you want to discuss grant income, discuss the administration of federal awards if the grant income comes from federal awards, and you want to talk about any administration of grant income if it comes from state or local activities. You want to talk about how that grant income is recorded, when it's recorded, and things of that nature, and all the compliance requirements associated with any grant income received, whether state, local, or federal. And then here also you want to talk about any cash drawdowns here. How do you get your cash drawdowns or reimbursed for expenditures that you incur for the grant? Is it reimbursable or is it advances? You want to talk about that here as well. Program income. Discuss what is program income and how often you need to record program income and what grants you should record program income for. In-kind contributions. You want to talk about that here as well. How do you value in-kind contribution and what in-kind contributions should be on which award? Interest income, you record that here, as well as accounts receivable and any cash receipt procedures. How do you record your cash receipts? When a cash receipt is recorded as revenue, when it's recorded as deferred, is you actually document those accounting responsibilities here. Section 3 is your policies associated with expenditures and disbursements. Here you want to talk about purchasing policies and procedures. Under this section, an organization will identify the procurement procedures and any federal, state, or local compliance for organizations your organization adheres to for purchases. There is a separate presentation for for DCTA that's being prepared and presented by Bill Roeder. And he walks through all the federal requirements for procurement per the Uniform Administrative Requirements. And he talks about what the criteria is for procurement and meeting the federal guidelines for procurement. And if you are using the federal guidelines for procurement, that information will be under this section. Then also you'll talk about the accounts payable methodology here, how often you cut checks, if you cut checks, if you use ACH, things of that nature. You will talk about also any allowable cost criteria, how you determine cost as being allowable and to be charged to a federal award, whether it's direct or indirect. And here you will probably discuss subpart E of 2 CFR Part 200, because it talks about the different types of costs and how to charge costs to federal awards. And that's, again, that's going to help a reviewer know and understand that you are using uniform guidance in order to determine costs. And that's going to make the review process of your federal awards and the costing criteria much more easier for you, the organization, and easier for you, the reviewer. And then also under this section, you want to discuss your payroll policies and procedures, talk about timesheets, talk about personnel activity reports. You want to discuss how your organization capture time and which buckets of time you capture in. Are you using customers, projects, programs, tasks, things of that nature? You want to talk about that here and how those things roll up in your general ledger. And again, you can be as detailed as you like in these sections, or you can be as narrowly focused as you like, but you will want to be as detailed as possible, because again, if you have any change in personnel, if you have sufficiently detailed policies and procedure, change in personnel will not change the way you're doing a particular process. They will be able to go to your detailed policies and procedures, identify those steps necessary to maintain, whether it's payroll, whether it's accounts payable, whether it's purchasing, procurement requirements. They will follow the same criteria that you have in your policies and procedures, and your organization should not skip a beat as it relates to your reporting criteria in your financial management system. Next, we want to go to section 4, which is policies pertaining to specific asset accounts. And here we just want to talk about how you treat these specific asset accounts. Cash and cash equivalent. You want to define what is cash equivalent in this section. You want to talk about bank reconciliations here, who performs them, who reviews them. You want to talk about who has signatory responsibilities, how do they achieve it, and who's monitoring it. Petty cash. How do you reimburse? How do you replenish petty cash? What is the criteria for utilizing petty cash for purchasing? And then also you want to talk about any investments that you may have. What is the investment criteria? How the organization uses these invested assets in the organization to meet their mission requirement or goals here. And then also, as you want to talk about capital assets here as well, you want to talk about their useful life. You want to put a depreciation schedule here that defines the asset, the useful life, how long that asset should be depreciated in the organization. And then ultimately here you want to, again, put in your prepays and talk about when you record a prepaid and how do you relieve a prepaid. Section 5, we'll talk a little bit about policies pertaining to liabilities and equity. Under this section, you can talk about due to, due from accounts, pension and OPEB. OPEB is other post-employment benefits. You want to talk about the OPEB requirement is actuarial basis or is it pay as you go? You want to discuss that. You want to talk about any fund accounting, if applicable here. If you're using fund accounting, you want to talk about the fund accounting process under this section. And then in section 6, the final section, You may want to, in this section, talk about policies associated with financial and tax reporting. Under this section, you want to talk about your reporting requirements as relates to financial and tax as applicable to W-2s and 1099s, the frequency of the preparation, when they're due, who prepares them, how often they need to be submitted in your organization. Form 941, who does the Form 941? Again, the frequency of the preparation. State unemployment tax, who prepares that form, how often should it be prepared? And then finally, if you have federal awards, you will have the FFR, which is your federal financial report, and the responsibility associated with who preparing that, how often it should be prepared. If you have any grant reporting, you want to talk about that in this section as well. And you want to talk about those grants that you have to report on and the frequency in which you need to report on those grants. And then also for audit requirements here, we're talking about, we say audit requirements in this scenario, we're talking about a single audit. And if you have audit requirements that relate to the single audit and you adhere to, again, 2 CFR Part 200, there's a single audit segment in 2 CFR Part 200, which is 200.500. If you are adhering to that, you want to put that criteria in your policies and procedures and let the reviewer know that you're using 200.500 for single audit purposes. It tells you when you need to change auditors, when you need to perform a single audit. It just basically lays out the rules and regulations as it relates to your single audit and your single audit review criteria. And then finally, if you, for your financial audit, your annual financial audit here, you want to talk about that as well. You want to talk about the layout of your financial audit. You want to talk about if you're doing an MD&A. You want to talk about your basic financial statements here, P&L, balance sheet, cash flow statement. If you're not for profit, you will probably have a statement of activity, and or a statement of financial position. So you want to make sure that you discuss those things, what the roll-up is in each one of those schedules, and keep those schedules consistent from year to year for comparative purposes. It helps a reviewer compare previous year financial statement with current year financial statement to get trends and understand how your organization is trending as it relates to its financial environment. Next slide, please. All right, here is the final section, and this is the schedule of monitoring. Here, there's nothing special about this particular schedule here. This is something that we put together, something that we've seen that in best practices of many of our accounting policy and procedure manual. And basically, it's not really, this isn't, you don't have to do it this way, but this is a standard template that we like and we think is easy to understand and easy to present. And you can see exactly where you are in relation to the monitoring process as it relates to reviewing your accounting policies and procedures. So if you have a section called version, status, date, author, and authorized signature, you're 90% done. You identify what version that you worked on here. The first version was version 1, and that was in 2010. That was approved, and the date that was approved was January 2nd, 2011. And it was authored by the financial management team. The financial management team could be authored by a team of individuals. Normally, accounting policy and procedures are usually reviewed and updated by a team of individuals because the individual should be a specific individual for each section of the accounting policies and procedures. And that person should be intimately aware of the internal practices of that specific department in order to make sure that you're documenting the internal practices of the department within the accounting policy and procedure manual. So usually there's a team of authors to make sure that what's being documented in their department is actually what's happening in their department. So Here we put in a financial management team, and then you also could, instead of at the financial management team, you could identify all the folks that made up the team in this schedule monitoring as well. But again, that's something that you could add if you like to. And then finally, if you have a board or if you have a council, you have to have your policies and procedures approved. So you have to get the signature of the board or the council to show that these policy and procedures were approved, and they were approved on this particular day, to show that this is the day that we start implementing these new updated policies and procedures. So if you keep this particular process or presentation, you'll be able to see the last time your policy and procedures was updated, last time they were approved, and you can see when the next time they're due. Now, in your policies and procedures, you should identify how often you update your policies and procedures. And again, there's really no identified regulation on how often they should be updated, but you want to make sure, based off of changes in your organization, how often your organization is changing, you want to make sure that your policy and procedures accommodate those changes. If you change your financial management system, you go from, say, QuickBooks to an MIP, that you should automatically be changing your, you automatically should be updating your policies and procedures because you're no longer using the same financial management system. So things like that, major changes like that, should trigger that you have to update your policies and procedures. But for the most part, you should probably put something in there that you update your policy and procedures every 3 years, every 5 years, just to have something in there to show reviewers that you are doing the necessary updates to ensure that you stay current with your internal practices in your organization. Next slide, please. All right, and here are some resources and references that we use in order to prepare this presentation for you. Of course, you can always go to HUD Exchange. HUD Exchange is rich in data and information that can help you with your policies and procedures, and also your Uniform Administrative Guidance, cost principles, and audit requirements for federal awards. That's also known as 2 CFR Part 200. That is a very good document to help you prepare your policies and procedures, and the references that are in that document, and I spoke of often during this presentation, can be utilized to help you ensure that your organization is in fact aligned with the Uniform Administrative Guidance, to show reviewers that you are adhering to those federal guidelines as relates to cost for your organization, as it relates to financial management for your organization, as it relates to procurement, and anything else that's in that document that is as impactful to your organization. And that concludes this presentation. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.